All right, so in looking at the project scope statement pilot, documentation for it is going to be found in the project scope statement space under the documentation tab. Here's kind of an overview of the process. It will start in Confluence by creating the PSS template and then creating the Jira issue. At that point, we'll kick over to the Jira workflow. We'll go over that in depth in just a little bit. And then while that's happening, the templates that are being created in Confluence that are PSSs will populate in this project scope statement in Confluence page, as well as the workflow is taking place in Jira. It'll be populated and updated here as well. So the PMO will be notified when a PSS is created in Confluence, and also when as it transitions through certain points in the workflow, the PMO will be notified, as well as the applicable groups. So we'll go ahead and walk through it. Please, if you have questions, check out the documentation. Gives kind of an overview of roles, and then at the bottom there's also this the feedback and issues link, which is actually another Jira project for any feedback during this pilot. So please use that and check out the help in Confluence as well. All right, so let's get to it. So beginning, let's say we want to start the entire process from the beginning. We'll go to the Confluence space that we want to create the PSS in, and using the ellipsis at the top, we'll scroll down to HL7 project scope statement template and create. From here, the page title will be something to the effect of the project name. So I'll say project 123 ABC test. The same is going to be true for the actual form. And then at this point, I won't continue filling out the PSS, but this is where you would fill out the data in the PSS. The only thing that's going to be important for this demo is the project name itself, because that's what we're going to use to create the Jira issue. So once you continue filling out the PSS, you get all your information in there. We'll go ahead and publish the page. All right, so now we've just created a new page in Confluence that has our project name at the top and all the applicable information from the PSS on it. From here, we're going to highlight the project name and then move our mouse just up, and we'll see this triple arrow that's going to create our Jira issue. We will select the project scope statement project, and the type is going to be project scope statement. And I'll leave the description pretty basic. And we'll create. The page will reload. And now we can see that we have this link to a Jira issue and the state that it's in. Now, I'm going to navigate back over to the project scope statement space so we can see that this is populating correctly. And here it is. So again, project scope statement space, we're seeing the page we've just created, and it gives the space name where it exists. And if we go over here to the PSSs in Jira, we'll see that we've created the project, the approval process, we've started it, and the status is in draft. And all of this content is blank because we've not selected or configured any of this. So that's going to be the next step. We're going to go over to the project and we're going to configure this and get the approval process started. So I'm going to use this link. All right, so now we're at the issue that we've created. Here is a link to the page it exists on here. We're going to edit in this top left. And I'm gonna configure this, and then we'll go over the workflow and kind of how that's gonna look forward, and then I'll step it through so we can actually see what's gonna happen. So I'll edit this issue, and it's not showing up because I just refreshed this. And get management group and US realm in here. All right. So in editing the issue, we're going to select our sponsoring work group. I'm just going to use anesthesia. And then co-sponsoring, make sure this isn't one that I already
have a
have.
question for you, Josh.
Yeah, please.
If somebody started editing this back over in Confluence, they started filling out sponsoring work group, whatever, EST, co-sponsor, publishing, would that info, that would populate somewhere in the background, it's populating the same. In other words, the info would flow over to Jira once that's populated.
Correct. Yeah. So that's that will be a thing as soon as this is officially released. During the pilot, there will be double input of data here because that's not all sewn together on the back end yet. But I am currently working on something that will. It's going to be a form. It's going to be a dynamic form, so it won't have all of this kind of confusingness to it. It'll be a dynamic form where you'll select, all your sponsoring applicable groups, and then when you create the issue, all of this will be automatically filled out for you.
Okay, yeah.
So just during the pilot, it'll be double input of data here.
Okay.
Yep. So, and does that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, because in the long run, if we don't have that single effort of putting it in, we're going to create all kinds of discrepancies if they have to do double entry in 2 different spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm going to use CME here as a co-sponsoring, and I know these don't necessarily go together. I'm trying to avoid for this demo using any email addresses that have been associated to actual work groups for the pilot, so notifications aren't going out to those work groups during this this demo. So that's for the kind of sporadic choice of groups here. And then for management groups, I'm going to use, let's get down to CDA. And then I'm going to say no US realm. We'll add that in just a bit to show what an additional edit would look like. And then steering division, I'm going to say the administrative steering division. That should avoid notifications going out. All right, so I'll go ahead and update this. And at this point, we still haven't actually started the workflow. We're still in this draft state. We've made our edits. We can kind of look over that here. It's listed. And before we start the workflow, I want to actually show what the workflow steps are. So we're here right now in draft. Now, when we start the approval, during this WG approval step, here the sponsoring work group is notified. So the notification goes out to the listserv for the sponsoring work group's co-chairs. They'll all be provided links that will link back to this issue. There'll be a subtask will appear here, and it will have this link will show they can go navigate to the PSS, and then they can cast their approval or rejection here. And I'll show what that looks like here in just a second. Once they do that, the issue will transition automatically to administrative review. During admin review, we have all of the co-sponsoring work groups, management groups, and US realm reviewing in parallel. And again, I'll go over that in just a minute and how that kind of interacts with one another. Once all of those reviews are approved, moving on to steering division. Here, only the steering division is interacting with the PSS. Once their review is cast, it goes on to TSC. From TSC, they can either kick it back to steering division for some kind of amendment or change that needs to be made. They can finally approve it, or in rare cases, they can reject it themselves. And the last thing that they can do is they can actually call to other groups, as can any group along the way. They can call to other groups that need to review this. So once again, once this is sewn together after the pilot, this will be automatically updating the Confluence page to reflect those groups as well, being whatever they are, co-sponsor or other management groups. And then, yeah, so final. Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I'm sorry. The most common place TSC will kick something back is to the work group. Can we give that option?
So one way that it can be handled now, although it's not showing here, is specifically going back, and I assume you mean the sponsoring work group?
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that can be done is the TSC can go in and the sponsoring work group subtask, they can actually change the status of that, and that will notify the work group. And then the whole, so the way that this parent workflow interacts with each reviewing group is that it's paused, it's essentially paused as the approval or rejection or corrections are made for each sponsoring work group. So the TSC could change the subtask to, instead of approve for that sponsoring work group, to needs review. They'll be notified, they can come back in, review, approve it, make the changes, and then TSC will be re-notified of that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And so let me show. I'm going to kick off this workflow process, and then we can look at the workflow for each subtask or each approving group here. So, and again, there won't be this many options. I have admin rights on this project, but it should just be start approval here. So I'm going to go ahead and start the approval. It's going to reload, and as we can see, our sponsoring work group, now that we're in the WG approval state, our sponsoring work group has a subtask created for it. It's anesthesia. It's in review status, and a notification has just gone out. Let me verify that. Come back in just a minute. It should be once every minute. Yep, and here we go. I'll bring it over here so we can kind of see what this looks like. And so this notification has gone out. So it gives a link to this parent issue, and then the context. So if someone's part of multiple groups, they know that anesthesia is actually reviewing this. So now we're here. If I go to the subtask for anesthesia, I can see the workflow for this. And these are the individual group workflows per subtask. So
those notifications go out to the co-chairs of the work group?
Yes, sir. Or
does it go out to the list for the entire work group?
No, just the co-chairs.
Okay.
Yep, just the co-chairs. So here we're in the review status. Again, the entire process. Let me get back to the parent issue here. So this parent issue status, WG review or WG approval, is pending this subtask, which is the sponsoring work group's approval. So when they go in here and they say, okay, we've reviewed the PSS, it looks good. Let's say for this example, the sponsoring work group says, okay, it's good. We'll go ahead and approve. We'll have this little prompt for approval date. And again, once this is out of pilot, this will be automatically editing the Confluence page and updating the dates here. So we'll say it was approved. How about today's date? That works. And we'll say comment. All right, I'll reload the page here. And we'll see that we've transitioned from WG approval now being in the administrative review status. Also, we can see that the CDA management group has a subtask created for it, as well as CME. So those two notifications have gone out as well. Those groups are being notified in parallel to come to this parent issue and basically interact the same way this sponsoring work group did. Now, co-sponsoring work groups have a unique option in the workflow in that they can, let me get to the co-sponsoring work group, they can opt out if they feel the need to do so. If they feel like they don't want to be part of this, they can opt out, or they have the approve reject. The management groups do not have that option. They have simply reject and approve. And again, all of these options, you won't see these here, but note that the approving groups are interacting with these subtasks of the parent issue. And just to update real quick, let me go back over to Confluence.
Can you require, if I know we probably aren't doing this at this point, but are we going to require if a co-sponsoring work group rejects the PSS, are we going to require that they include a comment so that the people behind the PSS at least have a clue or context as to why their request was rejected.
Yes. Yep. So let me bring up this workflow one more time, because this is very important to understand. That's a great question. So for now, rejected is not a final state. In this state, there really is no final rejection of a co-sponsoring workgroup. What a rejection means is that there needs to be modifications to the PSS. So let's say a co-sponsor says, okay, I'm rejecting your PSS for this reason. When they hit reject, they will be prompted with a note for rejection. And when it goes to this rejected state, the sponsoring work group is notified. At that point,
are they required to fill out that, so that you get that pop up, and they can't close it until they put some verbiage in there?
Yeah, I think so. It is there. Let's go ahead and do it, because I want to make sure. If not, it has been noted in the pilot task to complete. But okay, so we're at the co-sponsoring work group PSS or the subtask. So I'm going to go ahead and reject. And it does have a rejection reason, but I think this is one thing that needs to be adjusted. I think you can reject without leaving a comment. For the sake of the pilot,
it's not helpful.
right, yeah. So for the sake of the pilot, if there is a rejection, please leave a comment. But this will be required in the future, and it is already noted in known issues with this. So, but yeah. So let's say this is a comment, and I'll go ahead and reject. And so at this point, we'll see that, I'll check my notifications here. If we go back over to the parent issue, we'll see that this group has rejected, right? So around the parent issue, we kind of get this list. Now, the whole thing is paused. Let's say CDA management group has approved. They're good. And let's also say, we'll get this approval date here. Let's say comment from the CDA. And then let's go ahead and say that US Realm actually needs to look at this. So we'll go ahead and from the parent issue, we'll edit. We'll scroll down to US Realm. We'll say they do, in fact, need to review this. And since we are already in workflow transition, once we update this issue, it's going to send out the notification right away. So I'll update. It'll create the subtask here, and the notification to US Realm has gone out. Again, to the co-chairs, always to the co-chairs on all lists.
Is there an ability for the co-chair to delegate this to some work group member? The reason I'm bringing that up is because in the context of, for example, either vocabulary or OO, they have they have A, large memberships, B, a number of co-chairs, but sometimes there's like almost like subgroups within those overall work groups working on specific issues that may not, and it may not be co-chairs that are working on those subgroup or driving those subgroup contexts. So.
Sure. I think this is going to be one of those things that's going to be more clearly defined. The best way to do this through the pilot. There are the assignees. So there is this function in Jira to assign to a specific person. There's also in
assuming that the person has registered for a Confluence account, you could assign it to, for example, Hans could assign it to, I don't know, Rob Hausen, for example, on a particular PSS if he thought Rob needed to look at it because it was vocabulary related, something with OO.
Correct. Yep. And also another option there is in Confluence using, let's say that this, CME has rejected, and they went in here to the PSS itself, and they selected some information, and they actually inline commented on it. and @mention a user. So let's go ahead and do that. That's another way that we can kind of talk back and forth and see information. Again, recognizing that anything done in Confluence is helpful to understanding the process and is supporting the workflow in Jira. The workflow in Jira will be accepted as the official approval workflow. So that's the main idea there. But by all means, anything that takes place in Confluence. So if I say @Brian, internet's slow with this. Dave likes Dave Hamill. All right, @Dave Hamill. Please check this out for review. This applies to you. And now I'll save. And so in this manner, we haven't affected the official workflow, right? We haven't assigned it, but it is a pretty handy way to get someone's attention if it's something that can be corrected with a fairly easy, something that's easily resolved. So they're notified, they can come in, make the correction, and then workflow can continue. So and that's a great question, and I think hopefully this will be made much more clear after the pilot as to what is going to be easiest for the users to assign other people to kind of take over their roles and stuff. So.
Okay, yeah, I think it's going to be specific. In general, I think the general workflow seems pretty good, but there'll be specific work groups because of how they function. You'll find that things get delegated.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. All right, so I want to draw attention to this rejection that we made here. I'm gonna pull over the notification that was kicked out because of this rejection to the sponsoring work group. So the sponsoring work group got this notification. A PSS that you worked on named, our project name, has been rejected by CME. It's found here. So at this point, it's going to give you this link to this parent issue. You can see they rejected it. We'll be able to go in, click on it, and we'll see, okay, this is their reason for rejection. Obviously, it's not required. Again, reiterating, please leave a comment if you reject. But so we can see why they rejected it. We can go back to the PSS, look at it, massage whatever data we need to, make the changes, and at that point, we'll go back in to their subtask that they initially rejected on, and as the sponsoring work group, we'll say, okay, this is now again ready for CME to review. So we'll say ready for review. I'll go back to the parent issue so we can see the context here. And it's basically this interaction of a reviewing group kind of going back and forth with the sponsoring work group to rectify changes that need to be made. And so at this point, we can see, yeah, go ahead, please, Brian.
It seems to me that that when we need to make clear for folks or for participants in the work in this pilot that our suggestion is that they open up the project scope statement in a tab in Confluence, and they also simultaneously open it up in a tab in Jira so they can go back and forth with minimal effort because of the dual entry situation.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that is a good point. That's almost always typically what I do. I've actually severely limited my tabs. I had about 64 open, so
I'm just suggesting we make that we put that out there up front so people in the pilot, they understand they're going to have to go back and forth. Although in the future it'll be, since it'll be linked and it'll be easier, but at the moment it is what it is. So
yeah, I like that. I will make a note, and I'll add that to the Jira issues.
What if the co-sponsor is just saying they don't want to co-sponsor by rejecting it?
So if they don't want to co-sponsor, they're going to select this opt-out option.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. So they're not going to reject. They're going to opt out. And essentially, as the pilot stands now, there are no hard rejections by approving groups. So what that means is, if they reject, it goes into that interaction where they're trying to rectify the changes that need to be made with a sponsoring work group, ultimately ending in this approving groups actually coming in here and saying, okay, I approve. And so, yeah, so as of now, there are no hard rejections. The only way that they can get out of this, if they feel they don't want to be a part, is that opt-out selection. So now we can see we had one interaction where CME felt that there was something that needed to be changed. The sponsoring work group came back in, made the change, moved this subtask back to ready for review. CME came back in and identified that the change had been made, and so now they came in and they actually approved it. US Realm, in parallel with that whole process going on, they decided to come in and they also approved. We'll say there's a lot of approvals being done on the 21st. All right, and I'll refresh the page here. The refresh will be done automatically after pilot as well. It's also a known issue. So now we are at the steering division review state. So here, at this point, it is assumed that the sponsoring work group, management groups, co-sponsoring work groups, and US Realm, if applicable, have all checked this out and approved. The administrative steering division will be notified. They will come in, just like any other sponsoring, co-sponsoring, any other group, and they'll check it out, and they will either cast their approval or rejection. Again, noting that a rejection here signifies that changes need to be made. The sponsoring work group will be notified. They'll have an interaction, come back in, ready for review, and now the steering division will be again notified that they need to review. And
so the cycle where, for example, let's say the U.S. Realm rejected it and said you need to change this language because it seems to imply it is universal, when in fact this particular PSS is scoped such that it really only applies to the US. So the notification goes back to the sponsoring work group. They go through the cycle, they make the change, and then how does US Realm get notified that the PSS has been updated and is ready for the review again?
Sure. So that's this exact process here. So US Realm is saying it's actually it needs to be a different setting than what it currently is. They're rejecting with that comment. At this point, when it's in this state, the sponsoring work group is being notified on this subtask that it's reached this rejection status by US Realm. They're looking at the comment. They're going in. They're making the change. And once the change is made, they are moving this subtask, US Realm subtask, back to ready for review. So they're using this ready for review status or transition back to review status, and then once that transition is made, US Realm will again be notified. Hey,
are other work groups notified when, let's say, I guess in more way, obviously the sponsoring work group is notified, but are other co-sponsoring work groups notified when one of the co-sponsors rejects the language in the PSS at that point in time?
As of now, no. However, as those rejections are taking place from the parent issue, it is very open in that any group can come in and see what comments another group has made or is working on. So if I go to the parent issue, I can see, okay, let's say I'm part of US Realm, or no, let's say I'm part of a different, we only have one co-sponsoring work group, but let's say I'm part of Arden Syntax for some reason. And I want to say, okay, what is CME doing? I want to see, where they're at, why they rejected, what happened. So I can click on CME here, and I can see, this is obviously going to be the rejection comment. I can see, okay, this was done. And then upon approval, I didn't leave a comment. I'm part of the problem, but I'll leave a comment here, and that stream will be here. So that information will be available to view, but as of now, no, there are no notifications.
Is under the sponsoring work group, under the history tab, does that aggregate the activity on that PSS across all participants in the PSS review process?
So for not the sponsoring work group, but for the parent issue itself, again, remembering that this is the initial issue that we created, this red icon, that has the history for each one.
Okay, so you could see, so we want to, and that information is essentially available on the Jira side of the world. So is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, and it's
But,
available to anybody who's coming in here to check this out.
so we want to probably point that out as well, that if they're looking for a history of the overall review process for that particular PSS, to go to the PSS itself on Jira, and you can find the history there.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I will make a note of that as well. And I think moving forward, that history will be or could be incorporated into the PSS itself with form.
Okay, because that will be important for co-sponsoring work groups where there is this sort of, where one or two may, if there's 5 or 6 co-sponsors and 1 or 2 rejected and the language gets tweaked, the others may just, they may want to, it may not be material enough for them to change their opinion or their approval of the particular PSS, but they may want to at least understand the context why OO forced the project to revise some language, that sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that is very applicable. And
because right now, occasionally, sometimes these things have to go back. FMG asks some project to change some language, but that change in language precipitates another, cycle where the project has to go back to, I'm making this up, has to go back to EST and ask him, is this change in language okay, as far as you're concerned?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's very good metadata to kind of help keep everyone in the know as to what is happening. And I think that'll be very good to showcase in this environment. And that's exactly what this environment is helping to bring to light is what's happening, who's doing it, and not losing any of that information. So I think that's a great point. And I've made a note, and I'll add that in the PSS pilot things to do. So. All right, so moving on with this workflow, we're at the administrative steering division, or we're at the steering division review state. The admin steering division is coming in. They're interacting the same as we've already demonstrated, so I'm going to go ahead and say that they approve. Date of approval, again, the 21st. And I'll refresh. Now, this is where we slightly deviate from the process we've just seen so far. So each group so far has had a subtask assigned to it. At this point, the parent issue workflow itself is transitioning to TSC review. So for all the states in here, per state, all the subtasks in here per state had their own workflow and their own interactions. At this point, the parent issue is now in TSC review, and they are moving and transitioning the parent issue. So what that means is that TSC will have, and again, there won't be this many options, but they will have the approve, the casting final approval, signifying that they've reviewed all the steps up until now. They've reviewed the PSS. Everything looks above board, and it is good to go. So they'll cast approved on that. Another option is that they need to send it back to steering division. Another option is that the sponsoring work group needs to check this out. So Anne, since you brought that up, I'll go ahead and kind of emulate that, and we can see how that works. And then the last one they can do, obviously, is PSS rejected. So let's say TSA probably doesn't care about this. TSC comes in, and they've been notified. They navigate to this. They see that all approvals have taken place. They can see the history, and they say, after we looked at this PSS, there is one thing wrong, one thing missing that the sponsoring work group needs to check out. So they can take this and they can say, okay, anesthesia's the sponsoring work group. They can say, this is actually ready for review state, known issue. It should be just review. So I'm going to transition this back to ready for review. And at this point, one more issue is a comment required there. So at this point, TSC, still being in TSC review, has signified that the sponsoring work group needs to check something out, right? And they'll have a comment that'll be required there. I'll make sure that gets put in. And now the sponsoring work group is being notified. Okay, whoever came in from TSC has changed our review back to needs review. They've signified some change that needs to be made. And again, that interaction is taking place between TSC and that sponsoring work group. So now let's say the sponsoring work group comes back in, they've made the changes, they'll go to their subtask once again, and they'll say, okay, we're good to go again, we approve, date of approval and the comment, and they'll approve. And now TSC is once again notified of this, and they'll say, okay, it looks good, we've seen it, everything actually looks above board now, and we'll go ahead and cast final approval. And we'll go ahead and approve. We'll say TSC's approval date is also here. Final approval and approve. Refresh. And we can see resolution. Switch my filter back here to done issues. All right, so we can see that it's been approved. We can see the resolution is done. We can see all the work groups, the history. Again, noting this is the parent issue, that initial issue that we created in Jira. Over here, we refresh on the PSS itself. We can see that this issue it's marked out now, and that the initial status is, or the final status is approved. And then if we go over to the PSS project scope statement space, we can also see that the project we created has been approved and the applicable groups. So yeah, so that's the overview of the process. Noting that the initial PSS creation took place in Confluence under whatever workgroup space you're working in, and it's being listened for by this space using labels. So it's created anywhere in Confluence. It's showing up here by label using the project scope statements label, and then being, transitioning through the workflow that we outlined. So. Are there any questions?
One thing I don't recall you saying was that there is going to be a time parameter on it, right? Is it 2 weeks?
Yes, thank you. So if a group that has a subtask created for it, meaning sponsoring work group, co-sponsoring management group, if it sits unapproved or no transitions have been made within 14 days, a notification goes out to that group as well as to the PMO to encourage a timely manner in that. And I'm sure there will be edits made to that date range and how that kind of works. But as of now, there's no automatic approval or anything like that. It's just a notification reminding the PMO and that group that it's sat there without any work done for 14 days. Does that answer your question, Dave?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So for the pilot, some EST is likely not to have any particular PSSs come through. That, I mean, we just, is it feasible for folks in the pilot to create essentially dummy PSSs just to go through the workflow and see how it works? Or is it?
I think with this, it is a possibility, but I think we want to discourage that at this point. The purpose of the pilot is going to be using specific groups that are using known PSSs, because the dummy pilot that you're kind of talking about, we've already conducted.
Already done.
At least
Okay.
internally, yeah. So I think at this point we want to use actual PSSs so that we can kind of get that the feedback from that.
Okay. Just clarifying there.
Yeah, good question. Are there any other questions? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to stop the recording, and then please email myself, Joshua at hl7.org, or webmaster at hl7.org, as well as check out the documentation here. Thanks.